Greetings, Planeteers. Welcome back to yet another exciting topic of the Habitable Planet Workshop. My name is Esther Howard, and I obtained a BSc in Environmental Management majoring in Zoology and Geography from the University of South Africa. By now, you'll be quite familiar with this image. We have progressed to stage 5 of the hierarchy of models, and we're now on stage 5 of life. If we go back a few talks ago, you would have heard that the universe was formed 14.5 billion years ago, and Earth was only formed 4.5 billion years ago. Yet it was a mere bare rock and could not support life until a blue-green algae called cyanobacteria converted the Earth's atmosphere, which could then support life, and gave rise to the evolutionary processes such as photosynthesis, which was covered in the previous talk. Today I'm going to discuss the importance of biodiversity and food webs and how it contributes to making Earth habitable. So the outline today of my talk will be: what is biodiversity? Why is it important? The conservation thereof, its major threats, what are food webs, how it connects to biodiversity, what makes South Africa special, and the summary. So if we look at biodiversity, what is biodiversity? Well, it's the shortened version of the two words biological and diversity. And if we break it down even further, the word bios is the Greek word for life, and diversos is the Latin word for diverse, which is variety. So in essence, biodiversity is therefore the variety of life on Earth, the communities they form, and the habitats in which they live. There are 3 levels of biodiversity: genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. Genetic diversity is the genetic variation within a species. And if we look at the images, we look at, these are all owls. So it's one species of bird, an owl, yet there are different genetic variations. We have the Scops owl, we have the barn owl, we have the Pel's fishing owl, and the spotted eagle owl. If we look at species diversity, it's a variety of species within a habitat or a region. For example, we take the Kruger National Park. We've got an elephant, we have impala, we have a different variety of trees and grasses. Ecosystem diversity. This is a unique combination interacting as a functional unit between plants, animals, microorganisms, communities, and their non-living physical characteristics. So it's the biotic, which is the living, and the abiotic, which is the non-living components. Ecosystem diversity is different from that of genetic and species diversity. There are measurements for diversity. We look at alpha measurements, and this is within an ecosystem. There's beta, which is comparing ecosystems. And then gamma is the overall comparison across all ecosystems. What is the importance of biodiversity? Well, humans, us, depend on a functional ecosystem. It provides us with food and medicine, clean air, fresh water, and has economical value. And the higher biodiversity ensures a more stable ecosystem. What are food webs? Before we can understand food webs, we need to know that they are food chains. And if you have a look on the left, this is a typical food chain. So food chains is linked, and each link is called a trophic level. Food chains represent the transfer of energy from one trophic level to the next. Food webs, on the right, is therefore overlapping food chains. This is just an example of a food web, particularly a kelp forest food web. And if you have a look on the right, on the left, sorry, the otter would be the apex predator, and you can see how each organism is connected, my apologies, is connected in this food web. And the interesting fact about this particular image is that if the sea otter was to be removed from this ecosystem, it would actually result in the absence of quite a few other organisms. It's just a point of interest. So how do we connect food webs to biodiversity? Well, we get our energy from the sun. And as I mentioned in the two previous slides, that food chains is the transfer of energy from one level to the next. And because we ultimately get our energy from the sun, we look at the nutrient cycle. Now, this will be discussed a lot further in the next talk in more detail, but to just touch on it lightly, so we get the energy from the sun, and if we look at the image on the right, the energy from the sun is then received by the plants. It's photosynthesized to produce food for consumers, which will be the primary consumer, which is the little chipmunk or squirrel, who's then consumed by the secondary consumer. And even though the secondary or tertiary, etc., consumers might not have a natural predator, they would eventually die and they would decompose. And then the nutrients would then just go back into the soil. And this is then just a perpetual cycle. So in the next talk, the co-lecturer will discuss biogeochemical cycles, which consist of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Ecological stability is very important. There are two aspects of an ecosystem or to measure its stability. Resilience. This is the ability to bounce back after an environmental disturbance. And resistance is the ability to withstand displacement during an environmental disturbance and remain unchanged. Now we notice that there's a relationship between food webs or food chains and ecosystem stability. What are the major threats to biodiversity? Well, it's human activity. If we look at what one of the first ones would be habitat loss due to urbanization and deforestation, pollution, overexploitation of resources, not only with poaching, but also just overexploiting the land and other natural resources, alien invasive species, and climate change. If you have a look at the bottom or the middle, bottom right, that is what we call ballast water, and that brings alien invasive species in the marine sector or in the marine world, which is quite a problem because of the import and exporting process of vessels across our globe. And then, of course, climate change. So, biodiversity conservation. Why do we need to conserve biodiversity? Something that has value is worth protecting, wouldn't you say? And biodiversity has a value. It has an intrinsic value, which has a value in and of itself. So it doesn't have a specific economic or monetary value. And there's a utilitarian value, which provides goods, services, and information. Now, the really cool thing is that the utilitarian value is 100% free. And I do love freebies. And if we look at biodiversity and what it provides us, we call it ecosystem services, it's the utilitarian value. And if we just have a look at this wheel of services, it's quite intense if you have a look and you see that what all biodiversity offers us as humans. Clean air, it's a regulator for carbon, it purifies water, pollination, which also is very important for food security. So how do we conserve? What is conservation? Well, it's the protection, the preservation, the management or restoration of wildlife and natural resources. There are two types of conservation: in situ, which is on site in the manner of national parks and nature reserves. And if you have a look at the bottom, I've just put some logos of organizations which are actively involved in biodiversity conservation. South African National Parks, South African National Botanical Institute, Johannesburg Zoo, Two Oceans Aquarium. And then we have ex situ, which is off-site, and these are artificial sites, such as zoos, botanical gardens, and aquariums. So just a reminder, just in case you forgot about this hierarchy of models, or HOM as I'd like to call it, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Don't forget about this, it's really important. So, Planeteers, what makes South Africa so special? Well, I've just listed 4, and this is not all of them, but just the top 4 that are important to me or that tickle my fancy. So it's South Africa's biomes, its flora and fauna, oceans and climate. Well, firstly, I would like to just mention that we have the 3rd highest level biodiversity globally, which makes South Africa pretty high on the biodiversity, well, in the importance level. So if we look at the biomes of South Africa, this map indicates the 9 biomes that we have, and it's clearly marked or illustrated in the different colors. It's flora and fauna. So we're the 6th mega diverse country in the world, and a large percentage of the species found in South Africa are endemic. If we look at the flora and fauna, it's the only country to have its own floral kingdom, which is the Cape Flora Kingdom, and it is the top middle photograph, which is the fynbos and the king proteas and the pincushions, etc. It is also one of the 3 international biodiversity hotspots, namely the succulent Karoo and the Maputoland, Ponderland, Albany hotspots. If you have a look to the right, we have the endemic African penguin, and in the middle at the bottom is a speckboom or a porkbush, which is great for CO2 sequestration, and it's found right here in South Africa. If we have a look at our oceans, it's the only country that has 2 contrasting oceans in terms of temperature. We have the cold Atlantic west coast, which is fed by the Benguela Current, and then the warm Indian Ocean on the east coast, which is fed by the Agulhas Current. Just a little illustration, you can actually see the temperature of the oceans, and the scale at the bottom, or the measurement at the bottom, is just temperatures in degrees Celsius. This surface temperature was taken on the 3rd of February 2008, and it just gives you an idea of just where the cold spots and where the warm spots are. Just a short video, excuse me. Just a short video of the Agulhas Current, As you can see, it's flowing from Madagascar all the way down the east coast and twirling and just heading off into the Southern Ocean. We have great climates. We have such a variety of climates. From the coastal regions, they vary from Mediterranean climates in the Cape to a subtropical climate in the KwaZulu-Natal. Our inland regions are dry and we have with periodical snowfall on high-lying areas such as Matroosburg in the Western Cape and the Drakensberg in KwaZulu-Natal. So in summary, we went through and what the biodiversity is, why diversity is important, and how we can conserve it. What are food webs, and what makes South Africa so special? And why is it such a biological diverse hotspot? Because of this, South Africa's uniqueness, it makes it the perfect place to study Earth science systems because of its great diversity. So thumbs up to South Africa for being a mega diverse country. Thank you. See you guys later.